Um, so I appreciate being here because I am getting out of an Ebola call this morning. So that's good for me. I've spent my whole weekend with that. I just shifted positions again, so I am no longer the vulnerable populations specialist, which always made me nervous because I never felt like a specialist, but I'm now the training and exercise coordinator. So actually, I probably didn't have to take off today to come to do this, but I did anyway. So this is a slideshow with a lot of information, and I've been doing this for 25 years, so occasionally I will nerd out and you may not understand what I'm referring to, so please just ask your questions. That's totally fine as we go through the PowerPoint. So we're just going to dig right into it. This is the American Society of Civil Engineers grades for the United States of America today. This is not after a disaster, this is today. And so I just want you to notice where we're at on a lot of our infrastructure. We have water pipes in the ground that were installed the year the light bulb was invented. So we've got a lot of upgrading and maintenance that we need to do in this country. I can email this slide to y'all, and you can check out their report card. They actually do report cards, I think it's every 3 or 5 years. I can't remember. Any engineers in here? All right, well, they do it every 3 or 5 years. And they actually give report cards for every state. The last time I did this presentation, it was for Oregon and Washington, so I took off the Oregon numbers, but they're not all that different. So this is pretty much across the country, the grades that we get in our critical infrastructure now. And so these are the disasters in Oregon. Who is the person how many of you guys are from Oregon, have been here for several years? All right, okay, so how many newbies do we have? New-ish to Oregon. All right, new-ish, or where are you from?
All over.
All over.
Came from the Albuquerque area, and then New Jersey, Alaska, Chicago.
Ah, all right. Well, Alaska, same risks. Sir?
Is Washington count?
Well, sure, kind of. Sure. That's kind of not Oregon. Spokane. All right, so eastern, a little bit more east. Anybody else?
California.
Oh, all right.
Nebraska.
Nebraska, different kind of disasters in Nebraska. California, same kind of disasters. Anybody else from elsewhere? All right. If you manage to miss all the information about the Cascadia Subduction Zone, you will catch up in today's presentation. It's all over the news if you're reading for that kind of news. It's in the news here in Oregon. But the big one, our Cascadia Subduction Zone, isn't the only disaster that we expect in Oregon. Oh good, I have it in here. I was like, boy, I hope I put contagions in here because that turns out what we're dealing with now, right? Tsunamis, climate change, we're not going to talk about any of these disasters today except for the ones that are bolded, because then it would be a 4 or 6 hour class instead of a 2 hour class. So technological contagions in Cascadia are what I'm going to talk about today in a little bit depth. So this is some pictures of West Virginia. This is when we had our chemical spill into the water supply. So this was a company that left a rail car sitting too close to the water distribution center, and it leaked into the drinking water supply. 350,000 people were without water for, I want to say it was 3 weeks. And even when they said, okay, you can drink your water, there was a bunch of videos of people turning on their water, and it was brown and it smelled funny, and they were like, yeah, we're not turning on our water. One of the things I remember that surprised me about this, can we shut off one of the, can we?
Anything you want. What do you want?
I don't know if it'll help it. Well, it doesn't really make the, oh, well, I guess that's, no sleeping, by the way. So what surprised me about this, I guess I should have thought about it, but is that restaurants can't stay open if there's no fresh water. And so we had a lot of restaurants, a lot of economic impact for this chemical spill into the water system, and I just hadn't, I guess, thought about that. I did think about this one here, right? So in my house, I should put a picture of my house in here. In my house, I used to drink those Talking Rains, the fizzy water. It doesn't have any sugar in it, just so you know. It's just fizzy water. because they were 99 cents at the store. And so I didn't want to throw them away because they were plastic, and I am a disaster manager, so I would just fill those things with water and I would stuff them under couches and in the back of the closet. And you know, in your kitchen, you know how some of the cabinets are so deep that you lose things in the back? I don't, because I have water in the back, and so I just store in there. And then of course we had to boil water in Oregon, right? 650,000 people that had to boil their water. And the week before we had to boil water, my husband was sitting on his chair, and underneath our couches there are liters of water. And he looked at one of them, and my husband is a form over function human being, and he said, "Do we really need all that water?" And I said, "Yes, we do." And he was like, "Okay." And you know, I do this for a living, so of course that was as far as the conversation went. However, on that Monday when he came home from work, I said, "Hey babe, we're on a boil water notice, just so you know." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he grabbed a pot off of the hanger, and he went to the sink to start filling it with water. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, I'm boiling water." And I was like, look around. I was like, we don't have to boil water. The city is in a boil water, but remember all those bottles? It's not for an earthquake. It's for any time we have to have some water. So it was kind of funny that even though he sees them every day, he had forgotten that they were there. But yeah, so a lot of economic hardship, and then this is pretty typical. The government will send in trucks with a water supply, and they will pump water out, and then they will try and treat it from the trucks. And so people bring in their own containers, and usually I would not point to a milk container because that's not the right kind of container to store water in. There's cooties that build up that I don't know about, but you should have a water container, a vessel. And I always get questions about water storage when I start talking about this. We could do a 6-hour class in water storage. I am not a environmental health specialist. But the duration that you can store your water depends on the vessel that you are storing your water in. So I know there's a lot of documents out there that say you have to swap your water out every 6 months. That's not true. There's vessels you can store your water in for 20 years. So it really depends on what you're storing your water in and how you choose to treat it and things like that. So you can always invite a water specialist in for a presentation one of these days. All right, so man-made, another example of man-made or technological disasters, and we have these all across our country. But we certainly have the shale oil fields and this whole thing about fracking and what's going on across our country. And of course, fracking is poisoning our water supply. So at some point in our lives, we need to decide, do we want to drive more, or do we want to drink water? And of course, water is the most precious resource on earth. And so I'm hoping we all vote to drink water and stop fracking, but that's part of what is contributing to some of the hazards that we're seeing across the country. Fracking introduces chemicals into the oil that it is pulling up, and when it does that, it makes the oil more viscous. We have oil rail cars, but those oil rail cars are pre-existing non-conforming vessels to transport oil, meaning they are designed for safety to protect against the transportation of what we know of as oil. This fracked oil that comes out, like I said, it's more viscous, meaning it sloshes around a little bit more. So we've learned that those tank cars are not safe to be transporting that oil. And this was unfortunately one of the lessons. This is in Quebec. We've also had 2 more of these disasters, although not quite as significant as this rail car explosion in Quebec. But what you see here is 47 people were killed in this event, more than 30 buildings in the middle of their town. So I don't know if you can see these pictures very well, but it's right in the middle of town. So anything proximal to a rail is at risk for whatever the rail is transporting. And of course, you see a lot of people have no coal signs in their yards. Oil is going to be one of the topics that you'll hear politicians talking about in the future. And this is one of the reasons why is the rail cars, again, what pre-existing non-conforming means is you can't require them to change it. It is an oil car. They're allowed to transport oil in it. It pre-exists the new safety regulations, and it doesn't conform to the new safety regulations, but we can't force them to change that, at least not in a mandatory way. They can voluntarily change that, but as you can imagine, that's a lot of money, although they'll have to replace all of these oil cars, right? The next one is our big guy, and I've had a few people ask a question about this right here. No, earthquakes do not cause volcanoes, just so you know. However, when volcanoes erupt, they have clusters of earthquakes that happen around them, so sometimes people associate those two, and the earthquakes are actually, earthquakes related to volcanoes are due to the lava running around underneath the ground. So what the subduction zone is one crustal plate diving underneath another plate. Our Cascadia Subduction Zone is 76 miles off the coast of Oregon, and it runs 600 to 800 miles long from California, Oregon, Washington, and part of Alaska. As it dips underneath the other plate, what happens is it starts to build up pressure. And so what we have right now is a lot of pressure buildup. And when that earthquake releases, what that is that one plate slipping over the top of the one that's diving underneath it. And it will send a rolling motion inward. So that's going to be our Cascadia Subduction Zone. This is not a unique geological feature. It's across the world. This is what scientists refer to as the ring of fire. These orange lines right here indicate where those subduction zones have released within the last 50 to 100 years. So do you notice anything about this map? There's, you could say that I actually had someone tell me, Commissioner doesn't really believe in the earthquake. And I said, I don't understand. What do you mean she doesn't believe in the earthquake? Well, she doesn't believe in the hazard. And I look at this and I say, all right, well, okay. All right. I can't convince you. I can just tell you that people really a lot smarter than me have made this map, and this is what they've mapped out. All of those areas have released within the last 50 to 100 years. Ours has not. We have the advantage of having some new science. So most of us in the room, I don't see anybody in here that looks too terribly much younger than me. Some young folks here. But I grew up knowing about crustal plates, right? I knew that the Earth had crustal plates, but that was a really late discovery according to science. I mean, that was in the late 60s. So in the late 60s, we figured out that the Earth that we're standing on is kind of moving around a little bit. Earthquake geology science is pretty recent as far as scientists go. And we just had a paleogeologist who dug a core sample out of the Earth, and you can see that this is 8,000 years BC. And what he did is he tried to track, all right, when do we have these really big earthquakes? And this is what he found. So these kind of little red lines here represent really big earthquakes that we have not experienced in our lifetime. So those are magnitude 8 or greater. So most of the earthquakes that we've seen recently are 6.8, and then we did have a 7.6. It wasn't in our country, but we have not seen an 8 magnitude or greater, not in my lifetime. These bigger red lines indicate a magnitude of 9 or greater. And those are life-altering events. Those are earthquakes that someone like me, even though I keep touching that thing, sorry. Someone like me, even though I study this kind of thing, it's hard for me to imagine the effects of an earthquake that's a magnitude 9. The issue is they're random, right? So you see there's some really short gaps, there's some really big gaps here, and what we know is that the intervals between these big earthquakes can be as little as 40 years or as great as 1,000 years. What we know is, on average, it's about 230 years, right? 230 years in between those earthquakes, and right now we're at year 314. So we know that we're beyond the average duration of the intervals of these earthquakes, but we could have another 600 years. It could happen tomorrow, or we could have another 600 years before we have this earthquake. But we know that this earthquake is coming. We can see it in our Earth's history. So what I wanted to do was give you guys, what I wanted to do was give you guys a comparison between what the press talks about in magnitude of earthquake and then what scientists talk about in the magnitudes of earthquakes. So scientists use modified Mercalli or moment magnitude scales, and you will hear Richter scale when you're listening to the news. And so I tried to find a scale that would do a cross comparison, so if you heard one or the other, you would understand the difference. Unfortunately, modified Mercalli doesn't go up to anything greater than 8 on the Richter scale, and we're expecting a 9 subduction zone earthquake. So this scale doesn't really actually adequately describe the earthquake that we are expecting. So for those of you in the back, if you might not be able to read this, what it says for 7.5 and for 8 is few buildings survive, bridges damaged or destroyed, all services interrupted, electrical, water, sewage, railroad, severe landslides, total destruction, objects thrown in the air, river courses and topography altered. When I did this presentation for the Mental Health and Addictions Division of Human Services, I had some constructive criticism afterwards, and the director said, you might want to remind people that most people will survive a little more frequently than you do in your presentations. So I will say right now, this is our infrastructure. This is not human beings. This means our roads are going to be damaged, our buildings are going to be damaged. We're not going to have catastrophic collapse of the majority of our buildings, but we are going to have damage to our buildings to the degree that we won't want to live in those buildings anymore. So the estimates that, well, let's get to that. I do a terrible job of explaining the magnitude of earthquakes. It's a logarithmic scale. And so I have 2 slides, hopefully, that will help you understand the intensity of the earthquakes that we're talking about. So most of the earthquakes that we see, billions of dollars. We saw a couple of earthquakes in California. Most of our earthquakes are right here in the 6 to 7 range, 6.6, 6.5, 6.8. Our California earthquakes were that. Christchurch was that. And that's about the same energy release as the Hiroshima atomic bomb. And you can see the amount of energy that's released in those earthquakes. This is the earthquake that we're expecting up here. In 1964, Alaska had an earthquake of that magnitude. And if you Google pictures of the Alaskan earthquake, you can kind of see the damage that we're talking about there. And then this one is a slide that is very similar to that previous slide. And it shows you that we have a ton of earthquakes every day. You can go on OregonGeology.gov's website and you can say, show me the earthquakes. And we probably had 40 earthquakes last night. We didn't feel any of those earthquakes. We have earthquakes all the time. So these little earthquakes below the threshold of our capability to feel them, there's a lot of those. We have very few really big earthquakes, so the fewer they are is our big earthquakes there. But the Japanese earthquake that we saw on the news in 2011 rated right up around here, and we all saw the images of the tsunami in Japan. The difference between Japan and Oregon is Japan essentially lost their large metropolitan cities a few years back, and when they rebuilt all of their big buildings on casters so that when the earthquake happens, their whole building moves back and forth. We have not done that. Most likely after this Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake, we will. So that was the benefit that Japan had by essentially starting over. 2 years ago, I think it was, a group of 178 people got together, really smart people, people that have doctorates in geology and oceanography and engineers and those kind of folks. They got together and they said, all right, instead of running around telling everybody the sky is falling because this earthquake is coming, maybe we should really try and figure out what do we really think the effects of this earthquake are going to be when it happens. And you can find that report. I would caution you not to print it out because it's 326 pages, but there is a summary, and it's called the Oregon Disaster Resilience Plan, and it focused only on critical infrastructure. In the last pages of that report, it says, looking ahead, what we recommend is that someone looks at human resilience and civic infrastructure. We did not look at that. We just looked at the built environment. So what their report did is talk a lot about how long will it be for us to get services back up and running? What kind of damage do we anticipate experiencing in Oregon? Washington actually has a similar research plan that they released last year. So what you're looking at here is, of course, the state of Oregon. Red means really big shaking. Orange is less big. And then when you get into the yellow, that's even a slighter shaking due to the earthquake. But you can see that there's areas of red even over in eastern Oregon. That has a lot to do with soil structure and where it is in the in location to water. Water tends to be around soil that has the potential for liquefaction. If you want to see liquefaction in action, you can actually Google liquefaction and then hit videos, and you can see a lot of videos of liquefaction from the Japanese earthquake. And the reason for that is because Cascadia subduction zone earthquakes exceed the standard of earthquakes. Usually what happens is earthquakes last 15 to 45 seconds. That's on average. Most earthquakes fall within that time range. Subduction zone earthquakes don't last tens of seconds, they last minutes. So the earthquake in Japan lasted 5 minutes, so there's lots of videos out there. There was plenty of time for people to pull their phones out and take some images. So liquefaction is, anybody in here have a bigger brother? I'm the only one? Wow, you guys are so lucky. Let me just tell you. So when we would go to the coast, we would go to the beach and I would make a sandcastle. My brother would get a big bucket of water and he would dump it on my sandcastle and the sandcastle would liquefy, right? That's liquefaction. That's what happens to our soil when we have an earthquake and the soil is friable enough that it liquefies and the water table rises. And then amplification is just what it sounds like. When I said that a wave of motion would be moving in from the coast, what happens when it hits those areas of amplification, the wave just gets bigger. So liquefaction, amplification, this is a photo of Multnomah County. And these are the areas, obviously, of concern. They're bright red, right, along our waterways. Not quite sure why this is so red here. Water obviously doesn't explain that. So we have a lot of concerns with this. The main one is this guy right here. And maybe it's not a main one for everyone, but I live right across the river from it, so it is a big concern to me. And it is right here in the red, right? So Chile had an earthquake. It was a 6 point, I don't remember. It was a 6-something earthquake. And they actually had some critical structure just like this. So they had 90% of all of Oregon's energy travels right through here. These little docks here are where all of our liquefied natural gas ships show up, the oil ships show up. So most of the power that supplies the needs of Oregon travels through this port right here. This is what is called a tank farm, a hazardous materials tank farm. I spent 22 years in the fire service, and every year we were required to take a hazardous materials awareness class update. And I pretty much learned enough about hazardous materials that I knew I did not want to be on the hazardous materials team. They passed around a really big needle and said, if anything happens, jam this into your leg. And I was like, I'm out. I don't want to do that. So we referred to some chemicals as methyl ethyl death. And one of those chemicals is anhydrous ammonia, and it's right here. And anhydrous ammonia has a hazardous materials plume, depending on which model you plug anhydrous ammonia into, either 1.4 miles or 5.4 miles. The 1.4 miles encompasses my house, Portland Cascade College campus, and a lot of downtown Portland. So this is a big concern. This was one of the main things that the Oregon Disaster Resilience Plan pointed to. They said that needs to move. You need to move that thing out of the liquefaction amplification zone. So they have created a 50-year plan to move that stuff out of that area. In Chile, when they went to study what happened to this similar area, all of those tanks opened. So if the soil is moving, the tanks weren't designed for that kind of thing, and so if the soil moves enough, those tanks open. And I can tell you we carry around these little books that tell us what chemical has what plume, but I have never seen a book that tells me if this chemical mixes with that one, and that one, what the plume is, and I don't even want to know. I just want them to fix this. So in my personal preparedness plan, I have about a month's worth of food, which is a fallacy because I am not going to turn away my neighbors who are ill prepared. So really, I probably have about a week worth of food. But now I need another plan, don't I? Because I can't just hunker down in my house if I'm going to have to evacuate because of a hazardous materials cloud. So what we're doing now is, what we are researching is, how big will this plume be? How long will that plume last? When it dissipates, how do we notify the population that they can come back? And when they come back, what do they need to do to mediate? Can I still eat my carrots, or do I have to scrape the dirt away and down a certain amount of inches? So we don't have those answers yet, but we are trying to research that. And part of the challenge is these are private companies. So there's a lot of privacy information about what's in the tank. We have hazardous materials information, MSDS sheets, but there's a lot of proprietary information, so it's a little bit of a challenge getting that information. All right, so I just want to show you a few pictures. When I met with my neighbors to talk about preparedness, this is the only picture I brought with me. I blew it up. It's on an 8x10 piece of paper. And the reason that I brought this is because when I started talking to my neighbors, I was still in the fire service. And a fire engine weighs 55,000 pounds and needs a fully intact roadway surface to drive on. There is no fire engine that's going to be driving down this road. If you've ever seen fire engines fighting a house fire, they send more than one fire engine, right? They send a bunch of fire engines. And the reason for that is if this house is on fire, we will send fire engines to fight this house fire, and we will send a fire engine to protect this house, and we will send a fire engine to protect that house. They're called exposures. So we try and minimize the spread of the fire by fighting the house fire and protecting the exposures that are proximal to the house that's on fire. If we have an earthquake, and if this house catches on fire and this is what the road looks like, every house on this block is going to burn down. So if you Google images of the Great San Francisco earthquake, you will see images of fires. And this is part of the reason. We lose our water supply and we lose our capability to get down to the street. When I first got into disaster management, my fire chief said, hey, you're my educator, I want you to go out there and tell people what we're not going to be able to do, which was a really new job for me, right? Instead of coming around saying, here we are to save the day, I was like, hey, you're on your own, right? It's time to get ready. And this is why. It's not because your fire department doesn't love you. It's because they won't be able to get to you. And when we go into something called triage, we are looking to do protect the greatest good for the greatest number, right? And if you live in an area like this, you are not the greatest number. If you live in a high-rise apartment, you're the greatest number. We try and do the greatest good. If you live in a residential community, you won't see police and fire for a couple of weeks after this earthquake, at least, because they will be looking at large population centers, possibly Clackamas Mall, right? Possibly schools, if schools were in session during the earthquake, hospitals, high-rise apartments, places like that. Most of our resources are going to be dumped in that area. And I just want you to note that this was a 46-second earthquake. It was 6.8 on the magnitude scale. 46 seconds, that is not a subduction zone earthquake. This was Loma Prieta. It was a 6.9. And it was 15 seconds, and this is what it did to their critical infrastructure. We have bridges here in Oregon. This is not the kind of damage we expect in our bridges. This is the damage we expect in our bridges, where the bridge meets that liquefiable soil. So we anticipate that we are going to lose the connections where our bridges meet the landmass, but that we won't have catastrophic failures. So nobody thinks All right, that's not true. I guess there's a few people that I've talked to who think that the bridge will fall into the water, but most of the engineers I've talked to don't anticipate catastrophic failure. They just anticipate that if you're on the bridge at the time of the earthquake, you're going to be on the bridge for a while. So that's a really good encouragement for you to have an emergency kit in your car. You all should have emergency kits in your car anyway, but if you ever take a bridge, this should be that little extra motivation to do that. This is a picture of Christ Church, and yes, we verified that it was an accurate picture and not photoshopped, just so you know. This is some of the damage that we anticipate that we will experience in our infrastructure. We have rail systems. I just showed you some pictures of roads and bridges. This is part of the reason that I tell you that you're on your own for a period of time after that earthquake, even when help starts arriving, because the rest of the country is not going to be affected by this earthquake at all, right? So the entire rest of the country will see the damage in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, and California, and they will start heading this way. They will descend upon us like flies. We will have so much help. Unfortunately, they will be hampered in getting to the areas that need help the most because our infrastructure is going to be damaged pretty significantly. This is an image of an airport in Japan. I don't really know what happened here, but what I can tell you is that I use it because our airport is in a liquefaction amplification zone. So I anticipate that this is kind of what our airport is going to look like. The Corps of Engineers, the National Guard, and the feds have designated the Redmond Airport as the airport post-catastrophic earthquake, and this is part of the reason why. This is a house that survived an earthquake. I had a woman who told me that she said her building inspector said her house would survive an earthquake, and I said that house did survive the earthquake. And if you were in that house when there was an earthquake, you would survive the earthquake. That's earthquake survivability, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about the damage to our infrastructure and to our residential facilities. This just means that yes, most of us will survive. We're just not going to have water or power, and we're going to be living in a shelter with a bunch of people that we never would have chosen to live next to, right? I spent 22 years in the fire service sleeping next to people that I would not have chosen to sleep next to. So lots of snoring and other bodily functions that occur at night with boys. Sorry, gentlemen. You are just noisy. That's all I have to say. So this is some images of what you might experience from buildings falling apart and things landing on the ground. And the main reason that I wanted to show those and this one we can't see very well, but when you get a copy of this on the email, you'll be able to see it. But there's a ton of stuff down here, rebar, glass, bricks. So I want you to look at your shoes right now and tell me, is this what you would want to be wearing when the earthquake happened? And that's what it looks like on the roadway. I don't have any shoes that I would not be comfortable walking around in the earthquake with, because I know that this thing is coming and I don't know when it's coming. What I don't have, this is not the pair of pants I would want to be wearing, right? So in my car, I need to put a pair of, I have some Carhartts, so I'm probably going to put my Carhartts in the car and hope that nobody steals them. I already have my emergency pack in there, and my husband keeps saying, somebody's going to break the window. But this is why. You don't want to be walking around in a skirt and high heels when the earthquake happens. So another reason that you should have a kit in your car and a kit in your desk at work or under your desk at work. So not all of you spent 22 years in the fire service and got new fire boots every 2 or 3 years and have a bunch of extra boots around, but I do. So I've got a pair of boots under my bed, I've got a pair of boots under my desk, I got a pair of boots in my car, and a pair of boots for gardening, but you know. And I would have more boots, but at one point my husband was like, how many boots do we need to have in the house? So I had to get rid of some of my boots. And this is why I want to make sure that it's going to be bad enough. I don't want to hurt my feet, twist my ankle, and be of less use after the earthquake. I put this picture in here because I did a presentation at the library, and a 14-year-old was in the presentation. And she said that her teachers told her to drop, cover, and hold on under a table, and she thought that that was crazy, especially after hearing the first part of my presentation. And so I pulled these off of another presentation and I put them in this slideshow because what you're looking at here are school desks. There's school desks under here and there's school desk under here. And those are floors of a building that are being held up by those school desks. So I am not saying that drop, cover, and hold on under a table is going to save you from a collapse, a pancake collapse of a building. And yet there is proof that it might. What I am saying is that you drop, cover, and hold on because you don't want that thing right there, that light, landing on your noggin after the earthquake, right? It might not kill you, but boy, it's really going to hurt, and that's going to be unpleasant. So the whole purpose of drop, cover, and hold on is that when things are falling, they are hitting something other than you and absorbing some of the energy before they eventually land on you. Now, in this room, we wouldn't be able to drop, cover, and hold on under a table, but then we talk about beneath, beside, or between. So if it hits the top of the chair and then it lands on you, that's still better than landing straight on you. So if you're in a movie theater or something like that, drop, cover, and hold on is the best recommendation. So I've had people argue with me about that. I heard it was the doorway, and I'm going to run to this, and I'm going to do these things. I'm going to go outside. I don't need to argue the fact about drop, cover, and hold on because we are talking about a magnitude 9 subduction zone earthquake, and it is going to knock you on your butt. So you're going to drop. That's just, I don't have to tell you to do that. You're going to be on the floor. And as soon as you land on the floor, things are going to start falling on you, and you're going to look for cover. And when you find your cover and your cover starts to bounce away from you, you're going to hold on to it. So the whole drop, cover, and hold on thing is just what you're going to do. I don't really need to convince you to do it. Let's see. So those really smart folks, the 178 people that got together, this is what they came up with. So I don't usually teach preparedness classes. I just teach disaster awareness classes because everyone chooses to prepare to the level that they choose to prepare. I happen to have a month's worth of supplies. Some of our Church of Latter-day Saints have a year worth of supplies. Some people have 3 days worth of supplies. This is how long it will take to restore our infrastructure. What you choose to do at your level of preparedness is up to you. I can tell you that, where's my water, that I am hoping that sometime before a month, we in government will start distributing water at some level. I just can't tell you at what level or when. You saw the pictures of the roads, of the airports. Even if we landed a ton of resources in Redmond, we have to get it from Redmond here. And is Portland going to be the focus of rescue efforts? Our coastal communities are going to be the focus of a lot of our rescue efforts. That tsunami is going to wipe out our coastal communities. We're hoping that our practice with tsunami evacuation zones will mean that the environment will get wiped out, but that our population will be safe, which means we're going to have a lot of people that we need to take care of on the coast. If we are affected simultaneous to Los Angeles, Sacramento, and those other large cities in California, we're going to be spread pretty thin. So take this into advisement when you're considering how long you want your personal preparedness level to extend. And then take into account, again, what I've had to take into account, and that is that I'm not going to shoot anybody that comes to my house asking for food or medical. I'm going to help those people, and if I do that, then I don't really have a month's worth of supplies. It has really encouraged me to go talk to my neighbors, right? Because I would prefer that I have a month worth of supplies and that they have a month worth of supplies and that we're all good and we kind of live somewhat close to normal. But that's something you have to factor in. And then, of course, I've had to factor in the tank farm. So you need to look at the areas that are around your home, around your work, around where you worship, around where you play baseball or knit or whatever your communities happen to be, and think about what are the hazards around that area. How would you reunite with your families after the earthquake if they were in school or if you were at work, if someone was on one side of the river and you were on the other, knowing that even if we maintain one of our bridges, it's going to be shut down for first responders for the first couple of weeks anyway. So if you're on one side of the river or the other, you're going to be on that side of the river for a while, which should really encourage you to plan if your loved ones are on the other side. So let's talk about contagions real quick, since we have one going on now, right? Ebola is scary. I have a friend who is a nurse, and she told me that Ebola was the boogeyman, and that was good enough for me, I'm afraid, right? But I also, in my life, death and vomiting are right next to each other. The idea of vomiting to death is not something that is appealing to me. So I do these things all the time. I got norovirus once, and it was really unpleasant. And norovirus, if you are not aware, is what most people call the stomach flu. There is no such thing as the stomach flu. The flu is a respiratory illness. If it involves your gut, it ain't the flu. But most people will either call it the stomach flu or they will call it food poisoning. The reason that I always talk about norovirus in disaster presentations is because if you think it's the flu, the cleaning that you do to decontaminate items and articles is completely different than if it's norovirus. The flu lives 6 to 8 hours on hard surfaces. So if there's an influenza outbreak at a school, if they close the school that night and they reopen it in the morning, they don't need to clean the school. All the virus is dead. It only takes 6 to 8 hours for it to die. Norovirus lives 6 to 14 days on surfaces, which is why in those cruise ships, in our nursing homes, in hospitals, in your own home, when someone is vomiting and has diarrhea, almost everyone in the house is going to get it. It's really hard to prevent the spread. Norovirus is only killed by bleach and 140 degrees, right? So if you have any fecal matter, any vomitus, anything like that, any bodily fluid that has the norovirus on it, then you need to decontaminate with bleach or by washing it in really hot water and drying the items. You can actually get norovirus from walking through a room where somebody has recently vomited. You don't need to inhale much of the cootie. Ebola is droplet spread. So you can't get Ebola as easily as you can get norovirus. Now, the health care practitioners are telling everyone that it's not airborne, right? So you've heard this is not an airborne illness. I think part of the problem is that when people sneeze and the boogers travel through the air and land on someone else, and that gives you a cootie, I think most people would consider that airborne. It's not airborne according to healthcare because it's actually the droplets that you're inhaling that are getting you sick. Regardless, when people are coughing or sneezing, they need to maintain a good social distance, right? 3 to 6 feet, which none of us are maintaining right now, which is fine because I don't hear anybody coughing, sneezing, or sniffling. And remembering the contagious, she's like, ooh, the contagious period of viruses, right? So Ebola has that really crazy period of time that it incubates. So 21-day incubation period, that's tremendous. The influenza, I think, has a 3 to 6 day incubation period, but unfortunately with influenza, you are contagious a day before you're symptomatic. That is a real stinker. Thankfully with Ebola, you are not contagious unless you are symptomatic. So if you have a fever, you are now contagious, but the day before when you didn't have a fever, you weren't contagious. Norovirus has an incubation period of about 3 hours to 3 days. Boy, you are actually contagious I think it's 5 days to 2 weeks after you no longer feel sick. So when I had norovirus, I got everyone in the fire department sick because I was fortunate. It's a cumulative cootie, so the norovirus, the more cootie you get in, the sicker you get. So I only had diarrhea, which isn't that bad, but I don't have a really nice bathroom, so it was really unpleasant. And then the next day you lay around and you just feel wiped out because you were in the john the whole day before. And then the third day you feel fine, so you go back to work, which is what I did. And of course, I got everyone sick, and everyone was real happy with me after that. But that's because I didn't know. I felt better, so I figured I was okay to go back. And in the fire service, of course, we take turns cooking, and that was part of the problem. So if someone has been experiencing nausea and vomiting in your family, they shouldn't be cooking for 2 weeks to be safe. And that, yeah, you can pretend like you're nausea and vomiting, you know, so keep you safe. Ebola, what we're seeing right now, and you can see it here on how many people got sick and how many people have died. So what we're seeing right here is a greater than 50% mortality rate, and that is really significant. We have 35,000 people die every year from influenza, and influenza has a 0.01% mortality rate. Okay, so 35,000 people every year, 0.01% mortality rate, 50 or more mortality rate. This is a really stinker cootie. We don't like this one. Now, we're having a lot of problems already with people looking at people who look different than them and thinking that that means that those people have a cootie. We already had an issue with a young man on a plane in Portland who was vomiting, who was not from Africa, but sent everyone in a tizzy thinking, oh my gosh, you know, this kid has Ebola. You have to have traveled in the countries that are experiencing trauma from Ebola, and that just puts you in a low risk category. Moderate risk category is you were traveling in that country and you had exposure to someone who was sick. And then high risk is you were in contact with bodily fluids of someone who was sick from Ebola. So just being in those countries puts you at a very low risk. So what happened on Friday was we had a woman that we were monitoring who had traveled. She was not a healthcare worker. She wasn't exposed to anybody that had Ebola that she knew of. We were monitoring her temperature twice a day. When she spiked a fever, we took all of our precautions just in case. It turns out, of course, as you probably heard in the news yesterday, she does not have Ebola. We didn't really think she had Ebola, but we are using what healthcare providers refer to as an abundance of caution. In our abundance of caution, we are trying to make sure that we are being respectful of people's civil liberties. So we have the nurse in New Jersey, Maine. Now she's in Maine, and so she's like, screw you, I was not exposed. I am not going to lose my job by staying home for 21 days because you are afraid I might have a cootie. So this is going to be a conversation that we're having in our country a lot, and I really, really strongly ask that you guys refer to CDC, to the World Health Organization, and then to Oregon Department of Health's Ebola information. The information is changing, and what we're trying to make sure is that people understand that people don't spread cooties, the cootie spreads. And so let's try and minimize our discriminating practices in this country, which we have not demonstrated ourselves to be very good at in the past. We try and, if you guys remember H1N1, what did we first call H1N1? What did we call it before we called it the swine flu? We called it the Mexican flu, right? Because it happened in Mexico. The funny thing is, it actually happened in an American-owned combined feeding operation, one of those pig farms, overpopulated, really bad pig farms, that an American company was running in Mexico. So to call it a Mexican flu would have been a misnomer, right? It would have been an American-owned company flu located in Mexico. But that's not what they called it. They called it the Mexican flu. They started moving to call it the swine flu, which almost started a war in another country because one country wanted to kill the pigs and the pigs were precious to the other country, so we almost started a war over there. And here, do you guys remember when H1N1 first showed its head in our consciousness? What month it was? It was late April. What happens on the 5th of May? Cinco de Mayo, right? So I am in the health department's emergency operations center, and someone came in on Wednesday, so 2 days before Cinco de Mayo, and they said, we're considering canceling the Cinco de Mayo celebration. And I said, really? Are we going to cancel the Blazers game? And they said, no. And I said, am I the only Mexican Indian in here? What's going on? So even really highly educated people, when we misname something, when we associate a culture with it, luckily we're calling it Ebola, we're not calling it West African flu, right? It is Ebola. It's H1N1. It's not a really good name, right? It means, you know, H1, I can't even remember what H stands for, but N is neuromenendez, right? It's not a very sexy name. So everybody wanted to call it the Mexican flu or the swine flu. The reason we call it by its medical name is so we can tamp down on discriminatory procedures and things that happen after we have named it after a group of people. What was SARS first called? The Asian flu, right? So yeah, we got to be careful about what we're calling things. So if you hear somebody saying something like that, help by, you know, correcting them and sending them to the proper information. If you hear that people say that, you know, I rode a bus with somebody and then 2 days later they had a fever, you know, let them be truth advocates when it comes to the cooties. And the nice thing about Ebola is the precautionary measures, prevention measures are the same as they are for just about any other cootie. Wash your hands. Wash your hands. How long are you supposed to wash your hands? Happy birthday, twice. Happy birthday to me, happy birthday to me, happy birthday, dear Alice, happy birthday to me. Oh, oh. Happy birthday to me, happy birthday to me. Have you ever seen anybody wash their hands that long? Very rarely. But that's because you and I don't go to the bathroom together. But yes, hardly ever, right? I did an informal survey at a movie theater a while back, and I sat in the John and I counted how many of the ladies left the John and washed their hands. Any guesses out of 10 how many ladies washed their hands? How many ladies washed their hands? You said 9? 1. 1 out of 10 ladies washed their hands. I thought boys were dirty. Boys are dirty, by the way. But girls are just as dirty, as it turns out. 1 out of 9. And then the one, and I got tired of sitting there, you know, toilets aren't that comfortable, so I got tired of sitting after about 15 people. And when I got out and I was washing my hands, the lady next to me did this number. And I was like, wow, don't touch the door, lift the... all of a sudden, you know, Michael Jackson with the glove made total sense to me. The mask and the glove, I was like, that's right. He was not crazy, he was smart. All right, so what can you do about all these terrible things that might happen out there? The nice thing is we've learned in emergency management, we used to go around and we would tell people, make a kit, make a kit, make a kit. Put your stuff together, you know, put the thing in your car, put it under your desk, put it at your house. And unfortunately or fortunately, we've had a lot of disasters recently. So we had Hurricane Sandy, we had Hurricane Katrina, we had Joplin, we had the Moore, Oklahoma. We've had a lot of local disasters in the United States. And what we've learned is, what we should have been telling all of you is, make some friends, make some friends, make some friends. Because actually, one of the biggest resilience factors is how many people you know in your neighborhood. So some of our poorest communities that were struck by Hurricane Katrina were the first to recover, because those communities were the communities that were already used to depending on one another to watch their kids when they stayed late at work, to help give them a ride to the hospital. Those really tight communities have recovered faster than most of the other communities. Now, I am not saying that our poor communities are better set, because our disenfranchised populations suffer disproportionately the effects of disasters. The richer you are, the faster you recover, and that's just the way it goes. However, you can build resiliency factors even if you don't have a lot of wealth. And one of them is by making friends, getting to know your neighbors. Not only does it reduce your risk from crime, right? People are less likely to be able to steal a bike from your backyard if all of your neighbors are keeping an eye out on your house. But it also, my husband works on the neighbor's house. She's an older woman. And when he works on her house, she gives him a jar of pickles. And her pickles are better than Velastic crunchy kosher dill pickles, by the way. She makes the best pickles ever. And chocolate pie that is to die for. Her chocolate pie is awesome. And so even if the earthquake does not happen in my lifetime, I get pickles and pie because I decided to get to know my neighbors. I guess the theory behind that is if you know 50 people, odds are one of them might know how to do drywall. One of them might drive a truck. One of them might know how to do electricity. One of them might be strong enough to muck out your house from debris. So the more people you feel like you could call to let your dog out if you're running late from work or give you a ride to the hospital, the higher your resiliency factor. The other thing is if you have access to information and education. So what you're going to see a lot in the future hopefully from your government is that we are going to be putting our educational materials in different formats. So on lower grade reading levels, in pictographs, so that anybody that speaks any language should be able to understand some of the safety messages. That we will be announcing things in with sign language as well as verbally, that we will print things in Braille, that it will be larger font so people that have a hard time seeing are able to see it. So you're going to be seeing a lot of information about access and functional needs, people that have a disability, they're from a different culture, they speak a different language. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to be focusing on to make sure that we give people access to information and education, because we know that that's one of the things that increases your disaster resiliency. Physical health, that's a nice finding. We already knew that it was good to be physically healthy, but if you can imagine if you have diabetes, if you're dependent on a medication that must be refrigerated after a disaster when there's no power, that puts you at risk. If you have any kind of disability, if you have a mobility disability, that is going to put you at risk. You saw what the road looked like after the earthquake. That's going to be really hard to navigate if you have a hard time getting around on a daily basis, if you can't see, if you can't hear, all of those things. So physical health is a really big determinant in disaster resiliency. And then finally would be psychological hardiness. So what do you think I mean by psychological hardiness? Yeah, believing that you can affect your outcome, right? How many of you guys have read Unthinkable? Who Survives When Disaster Strikes and Why? Did you like it? I love that. One person. All right, it's $8. So after this class, go online and buy Unthinkable. I bought 20 of them. As soon as I started working at Human Services, I bought 20 of those books and I started a lending library, and I started forcing people to read. I didn't force them. I gave them the book and I strongly encouraged it. It's a very small book. It's easy to read. And it's not really a book. It's more a compilation of interviews from people who have survived a disaster and why they think they survived the disaster. And what we have found is that if you just have a plan, your likelihood of surviving that disaster is increased exponentially. So how many of you know whether or not that door opens in or out? All right. Those are the kinds of things that you need to pay attention to. So I just did a psychological first aid class for a college class. And in that college class, I asked that same question. How many of you know whether that door opens in or out? And none of them knew. And I said, are we in a school? Do schools have school shootings? It's a very low frequency hazard, but if you are in a school, you should be thinking about that. What are the hazards? Well, it could be a fire, not very likely. It could be a shooter, not very likely, but those are hazards. And if there is a shooter, how do I secure that door? Does it open in or out? If it opens out, that's going to be kind of hard to secure. What might I do? Where might I stand? Where might I go? Just having a plan increases your survivability. Not only that, it increases your belief that you have the potential to survive. I'm not a big fan of parties anymore. I'm sure I was when I was younger, but now it just looks crowded and unsafe to me. That could be my years in the fire department, right? But the station fire, do you remember the station fire with the White Snake or whatever? They had the 104 people were killed in that fire. How many people over occupancy in that building do you think they were? They were 100 people over occupancy in that building. Fire codes are in place for a reason. I tell you, I went to the Lotus. It's a downtown nightclub in Portland, and my friends were all excited. It was a good band or something. I don't remember, because all I did was spend my time right next to the exit, looking at how crowded the place was, and I was like, and I bet you these people are drinking and somebody's going to throw up on me. I would like to go home now. I was not. I don't go out to clubs anymore, as it turns out. My husband really likes Ozzy Osbourne, and so he worked for a company, and they had the box seats, up at the top, and so he's looking down at the crowd, and it just looks like a moving throng of one thing. It was horrible to me, and he says, "Oh gosh, don't you wish we were down there?" And I was like, "No, I don't wish we were down there. How would you get out?" The psychological hardiness part is just having a plan, being aware. When the stewardess is talking to you about the exits, look at that door. Would you be able to open the door? What would you do? How many seats away from the exit are you? If it was pitch black and smoky and you were afraid, would you still remember where the exit door was? Do you always have to go out the way you came in? No. Right? So being aware of your surroundings is super important and really feeds into disaster resilience. The book is great. I don't think it's scary. I think it's enlightening. It's a nice mix of disaster survivor interviews and some neurology mixed in. And I had my whole staff read it. And one of the ladies, I said, "So did you finish the book?" And she's like, "Yeah, thanks. Now I'm paranoid all the time." And I said, "Oh, well, describe to me how it feels to feel paranoid." And she was like, your heart's racing, my shoulders are kind of tense and, a little sweaty. And I said, "Oh, can you describe for me how you feel when you're excited about something?" And she was like, "No, I know what you're trying to do." How do we feel when we're excited? Stomach's kind of tight, your heart's racing, you're a little sweaty, right? Your body's reaction to fear and excitement is exactly the same. The only difference is what you tell yourself in your head. I'm afraid, I'm excited, right? I told her, "You're just excited about your newfound situational awareness." She didn't believe me. So what can you guys do? You can do what this guy decided to do. I've decided that I no longer want to be an adult. If anyone needs me, I will be in my blanket fort coloring. I have done that a few times in the past, I will say. But what can you do? You can make some friends, right? That's, if you don't get anything out of this, I would strongly encourage you to make some friends. So how many of you guys think you have a diverse group of friends? Your friends are different than you. Let's see your hands. Raise those hands. I think I have a diverse group of friends. I think I have a pretty diverse group of friends. I'm a bleeding heart liberal, Democrat, tree-hugging hippie person, and I got a lot of Republican friends, right? I got young friends. I got older friends. I've got friends of color, right? How many times in the last month have I been uncomfortable when I was with my friends? Not very, right? So I would challenge you, if you haven't felt uncomfortable around your friends in the last month, you probably don't have that diverse of friendships, right? So people who make you think differently than you usually think, that broad, diverse way of thinking is going to help you think your way out of problems when you encounter really tricky ones after a disaster. So if you get a room full of people like me that have spent their entire careers in the fire service, you're going to get a bunch of firefighter answers, right? But if you get a group of people who came from a war-torn country, who lived in poverty, who are currently homeless, who are an engineer, who's a social worker, who's a stay-at-home mom, who's a firefighter, and who's a cop, you're going to get a really different group of solutions for a problem. So the more diverse your friendships, the more disaster resilient you are. So I challenge you to meet and befriend people who are really, really different than you are, and increase your brain's capacity to come up with solutions. And actually, what else will that do? It will build empathy. And empathy is a survival skill. And we really can increase our empathy. It doesn't matter how old we are. We can get more empathetic as we age. So continue with your training. I remember the first time I ever taught a class to Adventists. And I said, how many people in here eat brown rice? And everyone in class raised their hand. I was like, what? You guys already have a habit, a directive to take care of your bodies, to eat healthy. So I don't need to preach to you because you already get that, right? So a lot of you, I know Adventists, a lot of home cooking, a lot of skills. The Mennonites are also a group. When I talk to them, I just kind of skip this step, right? Because that's this top bullet is something that you share with a lot of the other faith-based organizations, is that you believe in the importance of skill-based trades. Unfortunately, in the United States of America, we've leaned towards those masters in business, those people that are starting a business, but they don't have a physical skill that they are good at, a trade that they are good at, and that's really going to hurt our country after a disaster. We really, really need those tradespersons. Get civically active. Tomorrow, how many of you guys have voted? Right. So those of you who have not raised your hands yet, get yourselves out there and vote. It's your job as an American. That's part of what it's supposed to be cool about living here in the United States, is that we are part of the government. It's no fair saying the government this, the government that. You are the government. I happen to work for you in a job that is being paid by your taxes. However, you all are supposed to be my bosses. You are supposed to be electing people who share your values and put them in a place where they give me direction onto what I'm supposed to do every day. So if you don't like something, fix it. Don't just complain about it. Spread the words, know your facts. So that goes back to, send people to the CDC's website. Send them to Oregon Health Authority's website. Don't tell them that, it's going to be 2 years before people come help you after the earthquake, but be realistic. Don't tell them it's going to be 3 days either. Let them know that we know that these things are going to take a long time to fix. And then I think this is one of my most important things I want to say about preparing for an earthquake or any other kind of disaster is you don't have to learn something new. You're already good at stuff. Whatever it is that you are good at, there is a role for you in disaster response and recovery. I am childless by choice. I don't really like children. I have a dog. Every time I come home, my dog is happy to see me. Kids, not so much, right? I got a niece and she's 16. Awful. If I am working during a disaster, I am not going to want to run the daycare, right? But there are people out there who love children. And if they will watch the children of other people so that those people can use their skill sets to help with disaster response and recovery, that's awesome. You are now part of the disaster response and recovery. If you love cooking, if you like canning, if you like sewing, if you like organizing things, if you like radios, whatever it is, there's a role for you in disaster response and recovery, and I'll show you why. Because this is a picture of Hurricane Katrina. This is what we anticipate we will see after our earthquake. Adventists, you're not going to be able to do it by yourself. Red Cross, they can't do this by themselves. The Department of Human Services, they can't do this by themselves. Southern Baptists, they can't do this by themselves. This earthquake is going to be all hands on deck. We're going to need everyone to be part of the disaster response and recovery. So these kinds of pictures, let's hit those lights again, just shut them all down again. Yeah.
Gary, can I
See if we can.
Okay.
All right. So this is Hurricane Sandy. There is no one agency that can do that. That requires everybody who lived there, people who didn't live there, organizations come from other countries across the world. That's what it's, and that was just Hurricane Sandy. You could scrape off the roads and drive. You're not going to be able to do that after the Cascadia Subduction Zone earthquake. And you're not alone though, right? So this is the Islamic Relief Foundation. This is Convoy of Hope. I believe they're part of the Methodist group. Southern Baptists doing what they do, right? They feed, they rebuild. Humane Society, if you love animals, that's another thing that you can volunteer for. CERT, you'll see those guys out there. In fact, are any of you in here neighborhood emergency team members, community emergency response team members in here? That's something you guys can do. You can take a class 24 hours. Medical Reserve Corps, anybody that has any medical training can volunteer for the Medical Reserve Corps. Or you can just show up. And somebody's going to put you to work. So this is a bunch of neighbors who got together to help sandbag their community. This is a community group that got together and they are mapping their hazards. What do we have in our neighborhood? What would you like to do? What do you do for a living? What do you do for a living? Does that give us a skill during a disaster? Can we use it? Do you have anything you're going to need help with? So you don't have to be part of any organized anything. You can get your 10 neighbors together or have a potluck and talk about what you might do after the earthquake. I got together with my neighbors and I brought that one picture of the road. And my neighbor said, well, you know, I have a gas grill. And so you can hit the lights again. I have a gas grill and I have an extra 5-gallon container for propane so that I always have a full thing of propane for my gas grill. And I had a gas grill and I was like, oh, I should get another. So now I have 2. I always have one full thing. And so his idea was after the earthquake, we drag our gas grills out to the street and we cook all of our perishable food in the neighborhood. And then we move into the frozen food, and then we move into the canned goods, right? It was a brilliant idea. I had never thought of, I only had one propane tank for my gas grill. So your neighbors, it will be surprising what you're able to learn when you have a potluck with your neighbors. And when you invite, how many of you guys know your neighbors? All right, okay. So you don't have to talk about the earthquake, right? Because really, if you don't want to scare people, right, you can just talk about what they like to do. What are their skills? What are their concerns? What are their limitations? That's all we really need to know during a disaster. There's a thing called Map Your Neighborhood. Have you guys heard of that? Map Your Neighborhood. It's got a little list in there about, do you have a chainsaw? Do you have this? Do you have that? And so I brought that book with me to my potluck. And I said, you know, so we can talk to each other about if we have these things or not. And my neighbor, Leonard, was like, I'm not going to tell you if I have a chainsaw. You're going to be wanting to borrow it all the time. And I was like, all right, Leonard, chainsaw, check. And I was like, I got, so you don't really need to know that stuff in advance of a disaster. During the disaster, people will be willing to share that information with you. It's a wonderful thing after a disaster to see how many people come together. And so this is just a sign. It says, thank you, volunteers, we love you. And then this is the end of the slideshow because it's true. If we are disaster resilient and we get to know our neighbors, you may just end up with a bunch of pies and pickles and no earthquake. And that would be awesome, right? You'd have friends and we'd make the world better and nothing would happen. It'd be awesome. Does nobody interrupted with questions? Do you guys have questions about anything? Yes, sir. I was hoping.
The tsunami, how far up the Columbia River?
Oh, that's right. Not very far. Not very far up the river. I have heard a lot of people that are concerned about that. It's not something that you'll see. If you go on, I think it might be the Department of Geology's website, but I might be wrong about that. But they have inundation zones, so it'll show you how far the tsunami will travel inland. It's not very far.
And what's not far in your mind?
A mile.
Okay.
Yeah, there's areas where it goes further in. And it depends on the sea floor, so the shallower the floor, the further in it goes. And then we do have a mountain range in between us there, so that stops it. But the depth of the ocean and then the surface of the land that it's going over. So there's some areas where it goes much further in, but it won't travel. It's 76 miles off the coast, and then by the time it hits the coast, it's not going to come up our area. And now we won't get a tsunami in our rivers. However, the land next to our rivers is liquefiable soil, and it will subside. And Japan has seen permanent subsidence of 6 to 10 feet. So it may feel like you have a 10-foot rise of the river because the land around the river is going to sink to a certain degree, although I don't know how much. They are expecting, there are maps in the Cascadia, Cascadia Disaster Resilience Plan. There are maps in there that show the subsidence on the coastal regions, and it's 6 to 10 feet, I believe, is what they're expecting, a permanent subsidence in the coastal areas of 6 to 10 feet. Did you have a question too?
Yeah, I live in Vancouver, so are there maps or recommendations for, potential for getting across the river? Travel with a canoe on the top of your car?
So my suggestion is you have a robust plan in your neighborhood. So I work in disaster management. I'm not going to be at home after the earthquake. I'm going to be working. And I have a dog that, like I said, I'm childless by choice, but I feel like that thing is my child. I love that dog. And I have 3 cats, 1 special needs cat. And I would worry about those loved ones, except I have a really robust neighborhood plan. I know all of my neighbors. Some of them are stinkers, but I know them all. And I have faith that they will come together and they will help take care of my cats and my dog, and my husband and them will work as a team to take care of each other. I am not concerned at all about not being in my neighborhood after an earthquake. That's what you need to build, because you will, if you are here, you are not getting back to Vancouver after this earthquake for at least a couple of weeks. So that is what you need to keep in mind. There is no canoeing. You will not even be able to imagine what that river will look like after the earthquake. There's going to be so much stuff in that river. That river is hazardous today to cross. It is going to be deadly to cross after the earthquake for a good period of time.
What about the potential for communication issues? Most people on cell phones.
Do you have a ham certification?
No.
It's the only thing that'll work. So if you're interested in communications, I would invest in a ham license and training and learn how to use a ham radio. They're kind of spendy. Anybody in here a ham operator? I think the radios are, you can get a $40 one, but I think the $300 ones would ensure that you can talk to each other.
Cell phones won't work?
No. You might be able to text message for a period of time. You'll be able to text message. And the phone companies, so my IT guy, and I don't know where he got this information or how reliable it is, but he came up to me a couple of weeks ago and he said, okay, Alice, they said that they will get the phones back online in 14 days. And they will start with the military, and then they will move to police and fire, and then they will move to the general public. So I don't know where the 14 days came from, but someone that he trusts told him that phones will be back up and running for the military in 14 days. And at some point after that, police and fire will have access to phone systems again. And then sometime after that, the general public. So 2 weeks is the best that I've heard so far. Because I had heard a month before, but that was the first time I heard 2 weeks. They do come in and they string temporary wires. So after Hurricane Sandy, they came in and they strung wires across the area, and they had phone systems back up in like 5 days. So, but that was a smaller area. But it was still 5 days. So five days to 2 weeks.
And that's landlines, though. That's not cell phones.
Oh, cell phones shut. You guys.
Because I mean, once you've got a tower down,
yeah,
you're a big hole.
Yeah, you're done. Yeah. Clackamas Town Center shut down 911 in 5 minutes. So we lost 911 5 minutes after the town center shooting. It's not, our systems are not designed for that kind of communications load. In 91, in wildfires, we had 900 phone calls to 911 in the first 5 minutes, and it shut down the system up there as well. It just can't handle the flow. And if you can imagine, everybody whose kids in school and they're not is going to be trying to get a hold of their kids and people at work, and yeah, it's going to be don't plan on your cell phones. Investing in ham training and FRS radios, those family radios, service radios. They don't have a long distance, but they have some capability to relay. Not good news. Not good news, except that if you know your neighbors and you have a nice, robust plan, then I hope that you can get to the level where I am, where I feel really comfortable not being at home after the earthquake. Now, I used to work in downtown Portland, and I did not like that idea. I did not like the idea of being stuck in downtown for 2 weeks or more. But now I work on the other side, and I feel, although I may be downtown for a meeting or whatever when it happens, who knows? But.
And that's the question. My husband works downtown. We live in Gresham. I work here.
Yeah.
So.
And where are your kids? Do you have kids?
Cats.
Cats.
2 cats. And so we have a house now. We bought a house this spring. So
Yay!
We're starting our collection of emergency supplies.
Good, good.
We have more room for them now.
Mm-hmm.
But for my husband, he commutes either by the Max or by bike.
Yeah.
So, like.
He needs to make some friends in downtown Portland.
Yeah, and he's working on that. But
I know,
yeah,
I was
that's what
looking
was
around
thinking. I
going,
think that's the only
where would I
option.
go? I will tell you that the Church of Scientology has retrofitted their building for a large-scale earthquake. I don't know to the level of significance of that, but I do know that they've got extra rebar and whatnot, so there might be some, I don't know if
The
they.
only building that's still standing.
It will, well, Station 1 better still be standing too, because they retrofitted that and dug down into Station 1, but if everything else collapses away from it, I imagine it will still be floating there, because the author of the Oregon Disaster Resilience Plan was the engineer that rebuilt Station 1. So I'm confident that Fire Station 1 will still be there. The area around it, I'm not sure about, but I know, and Scientology. But yeah, it was trying to figure out water supply for downtown Portland. It was a really, and I've been doing it for 25 years. And when I was working down there, downtown is I will say that is the greatest number of people, which means that's where police and fire will focus a lot of their efforts.
Yeah, Gresham, we're probably on our own.
Yes, yeah.
You do better to head for the countryside.
Except Gresham is pretty much out of the liquefaction amplification zone.
Okay.
Remember, you saw there were red pockets in the yellow, but it was mostly yellow just east of Portland proper. So yeah, just east of I-5, and you start getting into.
I wasn't sure because we're down near more downtown Gresham, and so I figured we were far enough away from the Columbia to kind of be out of that zone.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure.
And you can go on OregonGeology.gov and you can look at maps and you can zoom in and figure out your hazard areas a little bit better. Portland Bureau of Emergency Management also has hazard maps that show where the gas lines are underneath the ground and the water lines and things like that. So you can, if you're living in the Portland area, that'll help as well. Yeah, no good answers for the whole bridge thing. Sorry, but yeah, you're not going to want to get in that water. Plus which, remember the tank farm, the hazardous materials? That's all going to be in the water too, so you don't want to be in that water at all.
So 76 miles off the coast about the Willamette River?
I'm sorry?
You said 76 miles off the coast is the Cascadia
Yes,
Subduction
yes.
about the Willamette River?
I don't understand.
Oh, it's out in the ocean.
Yes.
76 miles into the ocean.
Yes. Yes, sorry, off the coast of Oregon, sorry. I was like, what?
So we're not going to lose any land, like all the big fear people say that when that earthquake hits, we're going to lose like 20 miles inland all along Oregon, Washington, Canada.
It depends on how you're defining lose.
Like falls into the ocean and we're having to move
No.
to Nevada.
No. No, but you will lose 6 to 10 feet, right? Because it will sink, and it will scour out our coastal regions. Just think about the Japanese tsunami. That's the tsunami.
Is this the tsunami that's going to knock them
Yes.
out, or the earthquake?
The tsunami.
Okay.
Well, the earthquake's going to do some damage, but and quite a bit of damage. Both. Remember the coast was that little red strip, right? So it's going to get whacked, and very technical term, whacked, scientific. And the thing is, the subduction zone is a magnitude 9, which remember is this crazy huge thing. As it moves in, it's going to minimize its impact, right? So I can't tell you that it's a 9 on the coast and a 8 in the center and a 7 here, but I can tell you that it's a 9 on the coast, and it will be less significant the further it moves into the state of Oregon, except in those liquefaction and amplification zones where it will magnify the waves again.
So we'll see, like downtown Portland, right along the river, we'll see actually worse damage there
Yes.
than you'll see out.
Yeah.
Even in, even
Yes.
maybe in areas in the coast range.
Yeah, in fact, you'll see pockets where the soil was liquefiable soil right next to areas that were on basalt, and there will be different types of damage.
So kind of like when growing up in the Midwest, we had tornadoes.
Yep, yeah.
So, I mean,
You'll see that
one
kind of
side
thing.
the street is
Yep.
perfectly fine, and the other side is gone.
Yes, yeah.
So this big one we're expecting isn't an inland earthquake, it's in the
No,
ocean.
right. I didn't talk about the Portland Hills Fault or the other earthquakes that we're at risk for, because they're much less significant. They would do a lot of damage, but nothing on the scale of the Cascadia. And those earthquakes are those 15 to 45 second long earthquakes that you could possibly see some of the California-like destruction, but not as widespread. So certainly Gladstone would not be as affected, Gresham would not be, the coast wouldn't be affected, right? It wouldn't be as widespread. And the issue with that is the less widespread, the more assistance, the quicker. The more widespread, the more triage assistance has to do and figure out where do we go to do the greatest good, right? Yes, ma'am.
With the Cascadia earthquake, what's the likelihood of it triggering earthquakes on the smaller fault lines?
From what I understand, not at all. Different ground movement. So I guess all of our plates move about an inch a year, which, by the way, is how long your fingernails grow. Who knew? Anyway, so that's moving, and the other plates, they're not moving in the same way. They're not. The mechanism by which they are caused to move is different than the Cascadia subduction zone.
I've also heard that when this earthquake hits, the likelihood of the Cascade Range volcanoes.
Right, which is why that one picture, one of the first pictures had the volcanoes right there. That's a common thing that I hear in classes. According to the geologists I've talked to, that's not what happens. Magma moving is what causes a volcano to move. And I suppose if the plate was next to the volcano and pushed the lava up, that would cause it, but it's way off the coast and our volcanoes are not. So there are underwater volcanoes, but yes, ma'am.
Because it's so far out on the coast, would we have any warning here before?
You know, it's interesting that you asked. Somebody, they're working on earthquake warning systems, right? And they think that they can give us a 20-second warning, 20 to 40-second warning. And I was like, what good is that? And then a friend of mine who's a doctor said, I could close a patient. And I was like, ooh, so gross. Ooh. Oh, an earthquake's coming. I suppose if you were that patient, that 40-second warning is going to be really important. No, I mean, in my opinion, 40 seconds is not much of a warning. Now, the tsunami warnings, right? The buoys in Japan are our warning system. The buoys off our coast are Japan's warning system. So the buoys would go buoy, and then there would be a tsunami. So there wouldn't be much warning without an earthquake here. So, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Well, when you talk about the damage along the coast coming in about a mile.
And I estimated a mile. You'd have to look at those inundation zones, because the inundation zones do this number along the coast just based on the, yeah, so, yes.
Even if nothing happened here, if all of that happened along the coast, it would impact us in a very significant way.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
I'm,
it's easy to think.
how many of you guys go to the coast ever? Me too. I only go to Manzanita because you can get 100 vertical feet up really fast. And I love Manzanita because, as I said, I'm a bleeding heart, tree-hugging, liberal, Democrat hippie, and so that's the kind of town that I like to go to. No damage is going to go a mile in there, right? Because there ain't a mile before you hit the mountain. So, yes, the Oregon Resilience Plan estimates that 5,000 people will be killed in our coastal communities. And then they estimate an additional 5,000 people will be killed across Oregon. So that's 10,000 people that they're estimating that will be killed. Multnomah County has 732,000 people in it. So in relatively speaking, that's a very low number, but it will mean that most of us will know someone that knew someone that was killed by the earthquake. I mean, 10,000 people is a lot of people. In 9/11, how many of you knew someone who knew someone there? I would think a lot of us did, and there were only 3,000 people, 3,500 people there. So yeah, it will definitely affect us. It'll affect our economy. It'll affect our psychology. Yeah, it's going to, it's going to be, and that's the thing is, my husband, I was talking about that we needed a bike trailer so that we could get the dog and the cats and that he could get out of the area because of the hazardous materials plume. And he said, well, if you think it's that much of a hazard, we should just move. And I said, okay. And he's like, well, we're not moving. And I said, well, what did you think I was doing? Kidding you? I mean, I was like, I do this for a living. I'm not joking. It's a hazard across the river. We have to have a plan. But it's really hard, I think, for people to take in how big this thing is going to be and then not be just stymied by like, well, I can't do anything. You can do a ton of stuff. I mean, like I said, all you have to do is get to know your neighbors, and you're already way ahead of most people. And most of you raised your hands already for knowing your neighbors. Just a question back there?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
You hear about earthquake aftershocks.
Yes.
What is the likelihood of that happening?
Oh, it is a definite. Japan had 3,000 aftershocks, I think, in the first month after the earthquake, and several of them were nearly as significant as in magnitude as the original earthquake. Yeah, that will, and that one of the jobs that I was doing in my former position and that I won't be able to let go of just because I can't let go of stuff very well, is mass care and shelter planning for the county and the region. And that's one of the complicating factors because every earthquake, an engineer has to go out and re-inspect the building and the bridge and that kind of thing. And we don't have that many engineers. And if we have a lot of shelters open, we're going to have to evacuate the people from the shelter, re-evaluate the building, reoccupy after every earthquake. And so in a lot of earthquakes in other countries, what we've seen are people camping out in parks and open fields. The challenge with that in Oregon is Oregon. I mean, camping out in a field in California is a lot different than camping out in a field in Oregon. So we're trying to, the mass care and shelter planning process is trying to take into account how do we get tents out here as fast as we can? How do we heat that space safely? How do we take care? We have in Multnomah County, in the county I work, we have 732,000 people and 1.2 million household pets. So, I mean, I got to figure out, I am going to be one of those people that does not want to go into a shelter if they're not letting me bring in my dog because she's a pansy. And she's scared of everything. And if I try, yeah, it'll kill me to drive. I'll be the person camped out in front of the shelter with my stupid dog. So I've got to have a plan, right? Because government can only do so much for me. And so that it's on my husband and I, if we're not gonna wanna put our dog in a shelter and you're not allowed in a person's shelter with your dog, you have to have a plan for yourself. And so back in the day I used to like camping. I don't like sleeping on the ground anymore, as it turns out. But we still have our tents, we still have our sleeping bags. So that is part of our plan is go to our friend's house who live on 108th and Halsey and camp in their backyard if we have to, right, with our dog and cats. So, and my cats, like I said, one of my cats is a special need. I had one cat, my husband had 2 cats, just so you know. When we got married, we have 3 cats. It was not me, I didn't come in with 3 cats. But my cat is a special needs cat, and he has the UR medicine for his urinary tract, and it's expensive, and so in my emergency kit, I have to always have a full bag of that stupid cat food because he's 15 and I love that stupid thing. And so I have to be thinking about what do I need to have in place for this beast of mine. How many of you guys have kids? Yeah, you got a whole other, I mean, you know, their behavioral health, you got to think of, oh, yeah. And food. You guys are, again, being Adventists, you guys are at an advantage to the general public. The general public thinks, oh, well, I'll just go to Costco and I'll buy that year's worth of food. Have you ever eaten freeze-dried food? Constipation, man. Wow. And you're in a disaster and now you have constipation. I mean, the only thing worse would be diarrhea, right? So, your body is already going to be super stressed. So trying to normalize it as much as you can is going to be really important. So my kit is when I go grocery shopping and my soup's on sale, instead of buying the 2 that I usually buy, I buy 6. And so I have a little rotation thing in my basement that I try and do. And it's just my husband and I and the animals. And I would say every year I donate probably 2 paper bags full of expired cans to the food bank. So I don't have a perfect system yet, but I'm close because I don't think I'm wasting too much money with the 2 bags of food. But yeah. Did you have a question, sir?
Oh, just some good news.
Oh, good.
Talking about planning, I want to remind people that we do wills and trusts still.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes, ma'am.
I have one more question.
Okay.
I might have 5 more, who knows, but I have 2 children. I live in Battleground, Washington.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Literally, we are from Battleground to here. I have my family spread out. My husband is pretty much home during the day in Battleground.
Oh, good.
I have a daughter at PAA, which is right next to the Portland Adventist Hospital. And my other daughter is right here on campus at Rivergate Elementary School. What would you recommend? How would you recommend I deal with this spread out family? Now, the one benefit, my sister lives about 2 miles from Portland Adventist Hospital.
How old is the kid that's by the hospital?
She's 13 and is a sophomore in high school.
I'd tell her to start volunteering at the hospital as a candy striper or something. Get involved in the hospital. If you're feeding into the disaster response mechanism will provide for you. So if I have volunteers feeding into my government disaster response, they will have somewhere to go to the bathroom, they will have somewhere to sleep, and they will have something to eat and drink. I will make sure that I take care of the people that are helping make things better, because if I don't, then I lose the people that are helping make things better. So that would always be my recommendation. So there's a lot of people who are living in poverty who can't put together a month's worth of food and supplies because they can't do that on a daily basis. So my suggestion to them is volunteer at your church, volunteer at the food bank, volunteer somewhere. You don't even have to do it before the disaster. You show up during the disaster and say, I'm here to help. If somebody can, watch my children, or if somebody can, if we can figure out something with my dog, I would be able to help with these things. This is what I know how to do. So I would have the 13-year-old. The hospitals, and I am totally unfamiliar with the Washington somebody asked about Washington also, the Washington mapping. So I don't know where we're fitting with battleground, but I do know that most of our hospitals.
I figured I'm on a liquidation place.
Oh, are you?
My yard floods every day.
Oh, okay. Well, then yes, you're probably right.
I figured my house is going to sink into the soil when I'm in it.
Yeah, I was really, I was a little surprised to find out that most of our hospitals are built to life safety standards, because are there any building code people in here? I used to be a fire inspector, but I don't think the way the code is written. But there's the building construction code, and then there are performance codes. And life safety is one of the performance codes, and then there's other levels. Life safety is the level that means if you're in the building and the earthquake happens, you should survive it. But it does not mean that you want to reoccupy it, which means most of our hospitals will be out of service after the earthquake. And I was surprised to learn that. I guess I thought that hospitals were built at a reoccupation level, and I can't remember what that performance code is. So I don't know what that hospital is built to. So if that hospital is built to one of the higher performance codes, that would be a great place to have my kid, right? Other questions? A lot of forlorn faces. Sorry about that. I wish I had better news. It really was a weird position in the fire service to be asked to go out and tell everybody that we're not coming. It's like, really? Okay. Hey, you're on your own. Yes, ma'am.
So our house is all one level.
Mm-hmm.
So if, in case of an earthquake, we won't necessarily have multiple levels to worry about, but because it is a 50-year-old house, there's a good chance that we will definitely have some sort of structure failure, I'm assuming.
Boy, not an engineer.
Yes, but the next
But you
question
can
is-
have them come in and look at your houses and strap them to the foundation. You can do a lot of retrofit of houses.
So my next question is if we're concerned about our house, we should be okay, camping in the backyard, right?
Unless you have a tank farm across the river. Right? That was my plan. I was going to camp in the backyard until I looked at the tank farm.
Tanks are.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, in fact, in government, being not as a human being, but as the representative of government, which is a horrible thing to say, I think, we would prefer that most people take care of themselves and that we are sheltering fewer people. So yes, if you are capable of camping in your backyard and you have supplies enough to do that, or if you have to come collect supplies once a week or whatever, that would be less strain on the system to try and take care of you. And that was my plan mainly because of the animals. But I can't. I'm not going to be able to do that forever, right? I'm going to have to leave for a period of time and then we'll be able to come back at some point. Yes, ma'am.
In the whole Adventist Community Services disaster response groups, we get together from Washington and over in the Spokane area and talk about things for the region. And what my counterpart is telling me over from Spokane is that they're preparing over there to house all of us, that they're just going to evacuate this whole region because they can't even rebuild. So their disaster over there is us coming.
Oh. Well, I will say that Japan was a great case study for us in behavioral health. We had a spike in suicide, as is normal for all disasters. Domestic violence increases about 38%. Drug and alcohol use increases. Mental health, the exacerbation of mental health issues increases. And when we remove people from their communities and their support structures, that is a very, very bad thing. Government does not have any plans to evacuate anyone from the earthquake zone. We've learned that is not the right thing to do. Keeping communities as intact as possible is the best thing to do. So if they that are evacuating are your fellow Adventists, that's one thing, but the government has no plans to evacuate people unless they're on dialysis, because the water needs for dialysis patients is really great. So those are kind of one of our top tiers of evacuees. And then critical life safety issues, and to be, if I weren't being taped, I would be completely blunt, but we are still working out the medical triage of who stays and who goes, who we're going to try and take care of here, and who necessitates an evacuation out. But if you've seen those really big helicopters the big airplanes where they have their medical stations, they can only take 80 patients. So one of the estimates we saw was that we may have 3,000 critically injured people in the 5-county region. So Clackamas, Multnomah, Columbia, Clark, Washington counties. If we have 3,000 critically injured patients, we can't evacuate them all, right? Because if you take 80 at a time, those critical patients are in addition to the 85% occupied hospitals that we have at any one time. So those decisions about who stays and who goes medically is not finalized yet, but no plans to evacuate anybody unless your congregation is planning to evacuate people, which is totally up to you. But
No, she wasn't saying within the denomination. She was saying in general.
Oh no, yeah, no plans. Eastern Oregon is worried about the same thing. Oh, no, you Portland people are going to come out here. No, they're not. Number one, it's going to be really hard. We're going to have a hard time crossing a freaking bridge, let alone crossing the state to go somewhere, so yeah, no. Other questions? It really is good news. All you have to do is make friends, right? And read a book, right? Unthinkable. And buy extra soup, right? And figure out what you'd like to do. I can't even imagine sitting in a shelter and just sitting in a shelter reading the book that I packed, right? I have a feeling that I know how I felt after 9/11, being in uniform after 9/11 and not having been part of 9/11, not being able to do anything to help 9/11. When people came up to me all the time and said, "Oh, we appreciate your service. You're a hero. You're this," I felt dirty. I felt like an imposter. I felt like a fake. It was the worst disaster I've ever been through because I wasn't doing anything. And so I threw myself I went to every memorial I got invited to. I volunteered at feeding breakfast to donate money. And then I felt a little bit better, right? I was doing something. So I think that I imagine that everybody is somewhat similar in that if you're part of the reconstruction and the response, that it won't feel as horrible. You won't feel as helpless. You will feel like you're doing something. And most people will survive. So there's going to be a lot of comfort, calm, and reassure that we're going to need to do. There is no perfect reunification plan. And there's going to be a lot of people that have their families spread out like you do, right? The battleground spread out. There's going to be a lot of people that reunification is just going to be a really, really complex issue. In fact, we haven't even started that planning process because we're not quite sure what specialists to invite to the table. We have Red Cross who has Safe and Well, and there's there's 3 other websites that do something with reunification. But if you can imagine, how would you do that when you don't have a really good communication system in place yet? So if anybody would like to volunteer now to start working on things like that, that would be helpful. So, no wills and trusts, but lots of stuff. lots of stuff that you can do now. Lots of planning efforts. In fact, if I lived in Battleground, I would be talking to my county emergency management department saying, what are your plans for reunification? What's your mass care and shelter plan? Is there, have you included the Adventist community? What role do you see us fulfilling? I had Sam Pellicer review the donations management document from the state, And he was like, I've never seen this. We don't do that. So we're trying to look at all of the things that are expectations of our faith communities and our advocacy communities, right? We have Self-Enhancement Incorporated. We've got Coalition for Intercultural Organizing. We've got a lot of advocacy organizations in our communities that want to improve the quality of life today. So we imagine that they're going to want to improve the quality of life after a disaster. And we've got to figure out how to coordinate with everybody to put everybody to work in rebuilding. Other questions? You guys can always volunteer for the chainsaw debris removal team, right? That seems like it would be fun. Lots of stuff to move, I would guess. All right. Well, thank you so much.